Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight for this important discussion on youth justice in Oklahoma. Growing up as a daughter of a lifelong court reporter who worked in juvenile court most of her 28 years with the state, I learned early about the intricacies of our youth justice system. By 9, because of my mother's job, I knew what it meant for a child to be adjudicated. That's the same age a child in Oklahoma who in 2019 was 9, was adjudicated for arson. 9. 3rd grade at most, facing potential life-altering decisions in courtrooms. That stays with me as we reflect on the direction of our youth justice system. At Oklahoma Policy Institute, we could be that too, Oklahoma Policy Institute, we and our coalition partners believe there's a need to reimagine youth justice in our state. This report release that you're here to hear about tonight lays out a vision for a system that prioritizes rehabilitation over punishment and seeks to address the root causes of youth delinquency. Oklahoma's current system is far too focused on punitive measures that often fail to take into account the trauma and systemic inequalities these young people face. We know that effective youth justice reform begins with community support and preventative measures. It means making sure kids and their families have access to mental health services, education, and opportunities that keep them out of the courtroom altogether. This is not just about reforming how we respond to young people after they've committed an offense. It's about coming together as a community to imagine how we engage with them from the start, ensuring they have the resources and support to thrive before they have to meet with the justice system. I'm really grateful for you all that are here tonight. I'm gonna go off script for 1 second and ask, we've got 2 special guests in the audience I'd like to announce. For those of you who are in nonprofit and work with a board members that are spectacular are few and far to come by, and our 2 spectacular board members that are here tonight I'd like to introduce because they go above and beyond all the time. Caroline Guerra-Wolf is in the back here, and Kim Holland. If you guys just want to wave and say hi, thank you all for being here tonight and supporting the staff and our work. Tonight, we're here to discuss solutions that could shape a future where children are supported and not criminalized, a future where we invest in youth development rather than punishment. We hope this encourages you to think deeply about what youth justice should look like in Oklahoma and how each of us can play an integral part in making it better for all children in our state. I'm very, very delighted to be able to introduce our policy analyst for youth justice, Jill Mencke, and our research analyst, Polina Rozhkova, to present on their wonderful report, Reimagining Youth Justice in Oklahoma.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jill Mencke, and I am the Youth Justice Policy Analyst at Oklahoma Policy Institute. At OK Policy, we use data-informed approaches to build toward an Oklahoma where all families can thrive. My work is informed by my time as a family preservation specialist working with families who were involved in the child welfare system. I saw firsthand the struggles that Oklahoma families face and how few resources we have to empower families and support kids as they grow up.
My name is Polina Rozhkova, and I work on the research team, at OK Policy. Most of my experience working on criminal legal system reform has been centered around adults. With youth, I'm learning there's an opportunity to really question the status quo on justice and punishment. And people generally agree that kids deserve a chance to grow up and become defined by more than the mistakes or poor decisions that they made in their youth. As a data analyst, I think it's my responsibility to humanize data when possible and to minimize situations where we reduce people down to a statistic. I hope we manage to do that with this report.
So I'm sure a lot of you know, but we're going to talk about what the purpose of the youth justice system is. Well, it's hard to pin down an exact definition or purpose of what the youth justice system does. What I can say is there are many different pieces and system actors at play. Because there are so many actors at play within this system with different goals, there isn't any one answer to this question. But at OK Policy, we believe that our youth justice system, in an ideal world, can maintain public safety while also addressing the needs of youth in the communities where they live. So how does this system work today? So this is an overview of what happens. It is no means covering all of it, but I will try to synthesize it as tightly as I can for you. So there's the pre-arrest period, which essentially means that a young person has not yet been arrested or referred formally to the Office of Juvenile Affairs. I mention this because this is often a decision point for police officers to make a formal referral or to take a child to detention. That is also a very natural place to offer diversion or an alternative to court or legal system involvement. Next comes a referral. A referral is that formal request to the Office of Juvenile Affairs that a young person is in need of services related to an offense like missing school or being caught with tobacco or marijuana. This stage may involve detention at law enforcement's discretion. A referral can also come directly from a school or parent, but 85% of the time, referrals are made by law enforcement. After the referral, a young person may be given recommendations for treatment from a juvenile services worker and living in their community, or they may be in detention waiting for their case to be heard in court. A case may become court-involved without formal processing or adjudication, or an official judgment being made. A judge might refer youth to a program similar to what a juvenile services worker might do, but this has the extra layer of process and procedure behind it. Many youth don't understand what is happening to them when they're going through the court system, and they don't understand the consequences of what's happening to them. This leads us to the treatment plan stage, which might be better known to a lot of you in the criminal legal system as a sentence. This is when a young person may complete services that they've been recommended by a juvenile services worker or required to complete as a part of court involvement. This may involve placement. Placement is when a young person might complete their treatment plan in a locked, secure facility. This means that they are completing their treatment plan outside of their home or community in a more hostile environment. And finally, that leads us to reentry, which may be part of a treatment plan formally, but I'm using it to refer to when youth is back in their community after completing their treatment plan or stay in detention or placement. Sometimes this involves formal programming and sometimes it does not. Now, if you understood all of that, I want to congratulate you. This is a very complicated system that I dumbed down a lot. But it's even more difficult to understand when you're a young person. So this quote comes to us from listening circles we organized in partnership with the Restorative Justice Institute of Oklahoma, along with our Justice for Oklahoma Youth Coalition, to learn more about youth's experiences in the legal system. We spoke to 31 youth in Oklahoma City and Tulsa who shared their experiences with us. This quote comes to us from us asking youth what they thought the most confusing part of the legal system was, with this participant stating, "There's not a lot that is explained when you go through the legal system. It moves fast. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of people talking. You've got the judge, you've got the attorneys, you've got a bunch of people on some cases, so sometimes it can be very confusing." In addition to being confusing on its own, there are also many factors that lead to legal system involvement. Risk factors that we say that can contribute to legal system involvement, including family and home and environment, poverty status, maltreatment and abuse, peer influence, academic performance, and living in areas of concentrated poverty or crime. No single factor directly causes justice system involvement. Instead, these factors often interact and accumulate. When a young person faces multiple risk factors simultaneously, their chances of entering the youth justice system may increase significantly. As you can see, in 2024, we were 46th in overall child well-being, ranking 39th in economic well-being, 49th in education, 45th in health, and 40th in family and community. Young people in Oklahoma experience an education system that doesn't suit their needs, over-policing and violence in their communities, and inadequate health and mental health systems. Years of disinvestment in shared services and flat state budgets without consideration for inflation has meant that these systems have had to do more with less every year, contributing to Oklahoma's sinking child well-being rankings.
You'll hear me refer to our report a lot. It's not a bit, it's just because I really can't cover 70 pages in this presentation, and we want to make sure that we really spend most of our time talking about diversion and solutions. As Jill outlined earlier, a referral is an official recommendation that a child is in need of intervention such as therapy, probation, custody, or some combination of these from the Office of Juvenile Affairs. So here we're looking at the graph of youth referrals. So in light blue, we're looking at the number of youth referred, and the dark blue represents the number of referrals. A single individual may face multiple referrals in a year, and each of these referrals may be made up of one or more offenses. From 2018 to 2023, we see that referrals have decreased overall and remain below pre-pandemic levels. We can't point to a single cause for this decline, but conversations with experts in the field suggest a growing understanding of the negative consequences that justice system involvement has on youth. We know that the use of referrals varies by county. So this map shows the number of referrals as a rate per 1,000 people in 2023. We divide the number of referrals by the population in that county and then multiply it by 1,000 so that it's a number that we can actually compare across counties. Some smaller rural counties report higher referral rates than we expected and compared to more populous urban areas. We do discuss this in detail in the report, but I will move forward. As Jill mentioned, 85% of referrals come from police, local police departments, and this graph shows a breakdown of the remaining 15%. So the second largest source of referrals comes from schools or school police, often referred to as school resource officers. We calculated referral rates of historically marginalized groups relative to their white peers, and this showed that Black and American Indian students continue to face disproportionately high referral rates compared to their white peers, albeit with distinct patterns, and we go into detail in this in the report. Very quickly, we are going to look at referral rates and adjudication rates between 2018 and 2023. We spent a lot of time on this in the report, so I just want to explain what these numbers mean. This graph shows us referral rates by racial or ethnic group, and a rate of referral is just the number of referrals divided by the population of that group. So when we're comparing referral rates, we calculate a relative rate index, dividing the referral rate of whatever group we're talking about by the referral rate for white youth, which is the group that we're comparing to. These calculations help us identify and track disparities over time. In 2018, Black youth were referred to OJA around 2.44 times as often as their white peers, and American Indian youth were referred at 1.68 times the rate of white youth. In 2023, Black youth were referred more than 2.5 times and adjudicated more than 4.5 times the rate of white youth. We do see a decline among American Indian youth. The rate of referrals starts to sort of level out and equal or approach the rate of referrals for white youth, suggesting a possible decrease in the use of OJA referrals for this group. When we talk about the complexity of the system, there's an added layer for American Indian youth as they face a kind of jurisdictional maze with the youth justice systems made up of federal, state, and tribal jurisdictions, and this creates more confusion for those experiencing legal system involvement. Finally, we noticed Hispanic youth experienced a gradual increase in their referral rate relative to white youth, rising from 0.63 to 0.75 between 2018 and 2023. None of this points to a cause, but it's an upward trend and, something to keep an eye out for. So, kids involved in Oklahoma's youth justice system often feel racially targeted. During one of the listening circles that Jill mentioned earlier, a participant shared their perspective. And those who know me know that I'm pretty comfortable swearing, but I feel like in this case, the text speaks for itself. We'll now go on to talking about court involvement, or adjudication. We use these terms interchangeably. So we found that between 2018 and 2023, around 30% of juvenile offenses resulted in adjudication. The majority of kids entering the system don't experience court involvement, and you'll hear that a lot. And we can view that as a win, but ideally we want to see the proportion of adjudicated referrals decline in the same way that we saw the number of referrals declining since 2018. When we look at the rates of adjudicated referrals broken down by race, we see that racial disparities persist as youth become court involved. So everything we saw before on the referral side is exacerbated as we move through these stages. Generally, when we're talking about overrepresentation, we're referring to the proportion of a racial or ethnic group within that specific stage of the system, and that it's exceeding their proportion in the general population. Walking through this table, there's a lot of information. So we're looking at referrals, the number of offenses, and the number of people referred, and then we're looking at the same breakdown for adjudicated referrals. This can get a little confusing, but I would think of a referral like a folder, and this folder contains a single offense or multiple offenses, and each person in our data set has at least one folder. The three columns on the right look at the representation of each racial or ethnic group, first as a percentage of all referrals that took place that year, then as a percentage of all of the adjudicated referrals that year, and finally, we're looking at the percentage of referrals for that specific group. That column is the moneymaker. So in 2023, as we mentioned before, around 30% of referrals overall resulted in adjudication. But when we look at adjudications by race and ethnicity, around 37% of referrals for Black youth result in adjudication, and around 31% of referrals for Hispanic youth result in adjudication. We're no longer talking about overrepresentation relative to the general population. What we're seeing is that once kids are entering the system, kids in these groups are more likely to experience adjudication or court involvement. This is in line with countless external research about harsher penalties for Black, Indigenous, and Latino people in the adult criminal legal system, and by extension, an overrepresentation of these folks in the incarcerated population. OJA data shows that the majority of youth plead guilty. So around 61% of adjudicated referrals had the status of adjudicated by stipulation or pled guilty, meaning the youth agreed to the facts presented by the prosecutor without dispute, and around 23% were adjudicated by plea of no contest. So a high rate of essentially guilty pleas raise questions about the factors influencing kids' decisions, such as access to legal counsel, their understanding of long-term consequences, and or pressure to avoid potentially harsher outcomes. And we hope to investigate this further. It's much harder, though not impossible, to change the trajectory of someone's life when they're intertwined in the criminal legal system at age 30, 40, or 70. But when we talk about diversion for youth, we're talking about the point right before we get here or here. And I'll turn it over to Jill to talk about what we mean when we're talking about the personal discretion that an individual intake worker or other youth service provider has to pursue or divert youth from court involvement, and the many alternatives to court involvement.
So this is another quote from one of our listening circles, and we were asking them about what the most confusing part of the legal system was. And this youth said, "I didn't pay for a lawyer, so I had to fight my case myself, and I didn't have someone to represent me." And this may be one experience, but it kind of underlies that whole problem that Polina was talking about, is that we don't know what legal representation looks like for youth once they're in this system, and it needs to be further examined. Because we're talking about youth that need guidance and that need mentorship as they move through a very complicated system. So one might assume that only the most serious cases would be subject to court involvement since it's a very serious process. But 9 out of 10 adjudicated and non-adjudicated offenses are shared between these lists. indicating that how cases are handled in court is largely left up to prosecutors or other legal system actors. This means that youth can receive different treatment or punishment for the same offense. That is not a legal system that works. Many of these offenses do not pose a serious threat to public safety, and with the lack of clear guidelines on when to offer diversion to youth, these decisions are inherently subject to bias or special treatment. So we talk a little bit about detention centers in the report. The use of detention centers, especially in this area, has come under fire due to practices and circumstances that foster unsafe conditions for youth. This is not an issue that impacts only Tulsa. It impacts our whole nation. Oklahoma is no exception. With the recent allegations at the Family Center for Juvenile Justice, with a detention officer charged with human trafficking, accusations of the use of solitary confinement, shortened or non-existent school days, and youth being denied medical care, all against the law, by the way. We bring this up because while the issues facing detention centers like these are very real, the Joy Coalition, as well as our team at OK Policy, believe that our role in tackling this issue is by preventing youth from ever entering the system to begin with. Our youth deserve to stay at home in their communities unless they pose a major threat to public safety, and that's not how detention is used. Detention is used pretty indiscriminately, same as punishment and treatment in the legal system. Court involvement can also have long-lasting negative impacts on youth, including disrupted education, increased likelihood of future incarceration, and reduced long-term employment opportunities. These consequences can perpetuate cycles of disadvantage and involvement with the justice system. The goal should be to minimize court involvement for all youth, regardless of race and ethnicity, and to explore more effective community-based interventions that address the underlying factors contributing to juvenile offenses without resorting to formal adjudication that has life-altering impacts. Here we have some effective alternatives to court involvement that are emerging across the country and in our state. Restorative justice is emerging across the nation as an effective alternative to court involvement and empowers youth with problem solving and interpersonal skills. Tonight we have with us Xavier, the Executive Director of the Restorative Justice Institute, moderating our panel on Reimagining Youth Justice in Oklahoma. Additionally, community violence intervention programs have shown promising impacts for youth and effectively reduces gun violence while strengthening and empowering communities. Tonight we have organizations on our panel tonight who have just been awarded a grant for the city of Tulsa to implement them with BerThaddeus Bailey from My Brother's Keeper. Yay! We also have Beth Svetlic from Youth Services of Tulsa. And we have Jess Eddy from Live Free Oklahoma City. So you'll hear from them in a moment, but those are just some examples of people that are working on better alternatives now. Additionally, there are models that we could use and haven't yet tried. The credible messenger model is one that formerly in justice-involved mentors guide youth towards success. This is something I could see working really well in Oklahoma, especially with how many adults are affected by our criminal legal system, and is a very effective intervention. Additionally, we've observed tribal healing to wellness courts implemented in some tribes in Oklahoma, which are culturally responsive alternatives to traditional courts catered towards American Indian youth. We've yet to see the long-term benefits of this new approach in Oklahoma, but emerging research shows that this is an effective intervention for youth. We can also utilize the existing services we have. Programs that offer safety and security for youth at youth service agencies that help youth avoid the court system, as we talked about earlier, are just simply not used as often as they could be.
So now we'll talk about sentencing and treatment plans. So there are no sentences in Oklahoma's youth justice system. Instead, this stage of the process is referred to as a treatment plan. But some of the outcomes we describe have similar names to adult sentences and often come with similar consequences for noncompliance. Nearly 1 in 3 referrals with a final status resulted in probation. For our purposes, a final status just means that we had a defined outcome in OJA's case management system. And some of the referrals filed in 2023 are still ongoing, so we don't have a status for them. Probation is used as an alternative to custody and offers obvious positives when compared to physical confinement. It does, however, require court involvement, and it involves surveillance or regulation, not just of the youth, but also of their family. External research has shown that probation can act as a net widener for BIPOC youth, bringing them into the criminal justice system where they may remain indefinitely. In 2023, 331 Black youth were assigned to probation, which is about an 18% increase in the last year. This overrepresentation issue that we've been talking about throughout the presentation is also evident in the use of probation, and we discuss it further in the report. Finally, we're looking at youth assigned to OJA custody or supervision. So here we're only looking at post-adjudication custody, meaning these numbers don't reflect the number of youth in detention or temporary custody awaiting adjudication. Custody does not always mean that the child is physically confined, and OJA custody is not mutually exclusive of other referral outcomes. Existing research using national data shows that Black youth are consistently more likely to be placed in custody than their white peers, and Oklahoma is no exception. In 2023, Black youth were assigned to OJA custody at 7 times the rate of white youth. Factors contributing to this racial disparity may include racial bias in decision-making processes, socioeconomic inequalities like higher rates of poverty, and disparities in access to quality legal representation, which we've sort of touched on. Jill talked about detention centers earlier and the accusations of physical and sexual abuse. I wanted to note that we spoke to some youth about their time in physical custody, and some described the violence that they faced and feeling scared of bringing up abuse. And they couldn't say what exactly made the experience different from prison beyond knowing that prison is worse. We just pointed out a lot of stuff that's hard to digest, but recognizing these racial disparities and trends over time is a step towards meaningful change in the lives of Oklahoma youth. We have a lot more to learn, but in the meantime, there are some immediate steps that we can take to address a wide spectrum of behaviors and needs, focusing on prevention, rehabilitation, healing, and breaking cycles of harm.
So here you can see the list of recommendations that we make in the report and go into in depth. You should read it. It's great. We worked really hard. But just some of those recommendations: funding and implementing new approaches to diversion, like what we mentioned earlier, while strengthening existing supports, and actually create guidelines of when diversion should be used. There are no guidelines for how diversion is used for youth. It's just, are they a threat to public safety? We need more than that, especially if we expect the law to be applied equally. So we can also remove developmentally inappropriate aspects of the adult criminal justice system from our youth justice system, including establishing a minimum age of legal criminal responsibility, like Shiloh mentioned in her introduction. We can ban the use of juvenile life without parole, including resentencing those currently serving life sentences for crimes committed as a youth. We can also eliminate all youth fines and fees, including fees for cost of detention, which are a lot of money. Strengthening advocacy efforts by uplifting lived experience leadership of youth, like we are working on with the Justice for Oklahoma Youth Coalition. And increasing transparency and accountability by regularly sharing anonymized data from OJA with the public. And finally, strengthening investments and supports for Oklahoma youth and families. These are the steps that we can take towards creating a more equitable justice system for our youth. There are many things that we wish we knew more about that we have on this slide. But I think that we have learned a lot about what we can do better and what we can do to make more transformative change for Oklahoma. So hopefully we can learn about more things in the future, but I am really looking forward to our community conversation that we are about to have. I would like to welcome up our panelists, but for now, this is the end of our presentation. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for making this out tonight to be a part of this. There's a lot of things going on in Tulsa right now, so you being here for our youth is super duper important to me, and I'm deeply grateful. I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves. I have some introduction questions, and y'all have liberty of free creativity how you answer any and everything. So if you can, just start with name, pronouns, role in organization, and this is a question we actually ask the youth when we open up the circles, when we listen to them. If you can get any tattoo you want for free, what would you get and why? Bert, would you like to start us off? We sent it to you a couple days ago.
Right. Good evening, everybody. I am BerThaddeus Bailey. I serve as the managing director of My Brother's Keeper Tulsa at Impact Tulsa. So when I saw this opening question, I showed it to my wife, and she said, well, you would get my name on your neck. I was like, no, I would not. But I would get like a lion, like on my arm somewhere I can cover it up if I needed to.
Thank you so much. All right. Beth?
My name's Beth Svetlic, she, her pronouns. I'm the Assistant Executive Director with Youth Services of Tulsa. And I have a 14, 12, and 8-year-olds and actually asked them this question, which was terrifying. My answer, though, is I wouldn't, because I can't commit to anything being there forever. Like, I just can't do it. So I would skip it and hope to goodness my kids, change their minds as they get older, because it was scary.
Hi, good evening, Tulsa. It's good to be with you all. My name is Jess Eddy, and I am co-founder and deputy director and chief development officer at Live Free Oklahoma City. I don't use all of those titles every time, but if I had a tattoo, not to get heavy or serious, but what brought me into activism and this work is an allergy to injustice. And then I also happen to be someone who suffers from anxiety. And I began working with the executive director of Live Free USA and the Reverend Dr. C.C. Jones Davis in the Julius Jones Coalition, and became a born-again Christian in 2021 as we were trying to get Julius Jones off death row. So I would have something that reflects my faith.
Awesome. Thank you. And once again, I'm Xavier Graves, he, him, his pronouns. I am the ED of the Restorative Justice Institute of Oklahoma. I shortened my title to just ED, if you want to try that out. And then I love this. I might actually get one in the next couple of days, but the mud cloth designs, actually getting a leg sleeve of a mud cloth design. So if you're not sure what that is, feel free to look it up. All right. So as has been touched on so many times, is we're really trying to go upstream to support our youth. And as the Justice for Oklahoma Youth Coalition, we really looked at the spectrum of how youth are involved, similar to what our authors just shared with us, going from pre-arrest to referral, court involvement, treatment plan, reentry. And we really saw that as a coalition, the biggest impact we can have is doing that pre-arrest, doing prevention, getting court involved, as well as the community sentencing, because as most youth are sentenced in their community, and really making sure those programs are serving them effectively. So as we get into just really understanding that mission, that impact we're trying to make, can you share with the audience just your impact, your relationship with youth, and the perspective you're going to be speaking from for the rest of our time? Anyone would go.
I don't mind kicking us off. So as the managing director for My Brother's Keeper Tulsa, our focus is unapologetically on boys and young men of color. So if we look at all of the data outcomes across our 6 focus areas, Black and brown boys are at the highest need for intervention. And so we bring together partners from across the cradle to career milestones and also across safety to ensure that everybody has a strategy that is going to reach our Black and brown boys. And so the perspective I'll speak from today is from this lens of what are we doing for boys and young men of color, right? Ensuring that we're not leaving them out of the conversation, because if we look at the data, truly there is a high need there. And so I'll also be speaking to really the role of education in prevention and intervention. How are we realizing the connection between 3rd grade reading, for example, and students who become engaged in the criminal legal system? And then also, as I already mentioned, but data and strategy, but also this convening prowess. What does it look like to ensure that we're all working connectively to divert and to prevent students from being engaged in the criminal legal system?
So I'm here representing Youth Services of Tulsa, which focuses on serving young people 12 to 24. Youth Services is a part of a statewide network of youth services agencies, and we are designated by legislative statute to partner with the Office of Juvenile Affairs to provide prevention services to young people. So that looks several different ways across the state. At Youth Services of Tulsa, we do that in several different ways. Some of that is really focused on our counseling services, but we also have an emergency shelter that's part of our partnership with OJA. And then we do some early intervention with low-level offenses, and then we also have a reentry program that works with young people coming out of some of those placements that they talked about. So we have been doing this work in partnership with OJA for decades, but we are not OJA. And so sometimes that work looks like partnership, and sometimes that work looks a little different than that.
So I'm with Live Free Oklahoma City, and we are one of the community violence intervention programs, as mentioned. To kind of actually conflate the two, community violence intervention is built on the credible messenger model. The principle that those of you who have any familiarity with alcohol recovery or substance use disorder recovery, you can't take somebody further than you've been. And so it operates on the principle that the people not only best equipped, but really only equipped to engage, to number one, reach, to engage, talk to, and then have an impact that diverts and pulls someone out of a cycle of violence or other harmful behaviors is somebody who's been in that situation. And therefore they have credibility with communities that and people that live in the cracks of marginalized communities. So we, I don't like to use the word target, but for obvious connotations, but we seek to serve people that are at the highest risk for involvement in gun violence. And because of the way the news covers violence, people, even us in it, because we watch the news, tend to think and overstate youth involvement and responsibility in gun violence. Well, that's largely because kids do the things that end up on the news, but it's more adults that drive gun violence and repeat shooters that drive any gun violence in any given metropolitan area. However, we end up dealing with a lot of youth in our program, and because of our role at where we're at, which is pre-arrest or re-entry, not anywhere really in between, as much as we can help or work towards. We are seeing upstream everything that's happening that leads to entanglement with the criminal legal system. And it is hard to watch because there are so many simple things that can be done in schools, that can be done by local municipal governments, that can be done by the federal government to remedy and fill major gaps that kids fall into all the time. That's predictable. It's a pattern. If they're suspended from school, that's a statistic. Then they get kicked out of another school. So there are points that we are just missing as a society while we are predominantly funding the system that is failing and creating the problem that we're talking about because their parents aren't there, because their parents are incarcerated or criminalized. And so, I'm here from that perspective. Sorry.
You're good. Thank you. I really love what you're hitting on because you're talking about their environment, right? And how can we go upstream enough to understand their environment enough to be able to shift and transform their environment, to intervene so that they're not having to make the decisions that they are making either as a youth or as an adult. And we really took that perspective when we did the listening circles with the youth. We asked them about what is their relationships with the system. We asked them about their relationships within their community. And then as a product of that, what is their relationship with their family and themselves? How do they see themselves, right? That really helps to determine what decisions that they make. And the following questions we have, I'm going to pull out some quotes and really actually have this moderated panel be a conversation with the youth from what they said. So it will be similar questions that the youth had. So starting off with community, one of the things that impacted me as I co-facilitated almost all the circles is their response to the questions of mental health. Some youth said that they have not received mental health support because they don't know much about it. Some youth shared that they may have been required to receive services, but initially were resistant. And then there was also youth that had very positive experiences with a therapist or case manager. One of the quotes says, "I don't really get involved in a community because I'm not a part of it. I've experienced therapy, but it really didn't work. But I think it was the therapist and it was kind of lame." I know there's also it sounds like a youth, right? There's other youth that was like, I didn't know anything about it until I was right there in front of the therapist. And like, can you imagine, like, your youth don't know what this is. You go in a room with an adult and you're supposed to talk about your feelings. That's kind of awkward, and we know youth avoid awkwardness at all times. Another highlight from the report says that 66 to 70% of youth in detention centers have at least one diagnosable mental health issue compared to 9 to 22% of the general youth population in Oklahoma. My question is, what steps can we take in the community to make mental health services more accessible and approachable for youth, particularly as a prevention measure to reduce their involvement in the youth justice system? Beth, can I start with you?
Sure. So I think I look at this question with like a couple of different approaches. One is I think that response by a young person of "I don't feel a part of the community" is huge, and how we create community and a sense of belonging for our young people, I think is critical in all of this process. And I think we have lost that. And I think, since COVID, that has really been a challenge to gain ground on anything as far as that goes. So I think that's a huge statement by that young person that it can't be overlooked. But then also I think, we have a lot of broken systems that we'll talk about tonight, but mental health is one. And I think one of the challenges in it being accessible is that our mental health system is very driven by money and who's paying for it, and all the barriers and steps families and young people have to go through in order to access that funding so that then they can get the services. And so I think that has created a lot of barriers for young people. But I also think that we approach it and we miss the boat in how we go about serving young people, and that we're using a model that has worked for middle class adults of make an appointment, show up, meet with a therapist, talk about it for an hour, leave, come back next week. And that's not how young people think and work. We need therapists that are in their communities, embedded, accessible. We need them accessible to parents so that they can come in and talk when there was a blow up at home the night before, and they can get that intervention right there when they need it. And I think a team approach is critical too. A therapist, a case manager, a credible messenger is a model that we use with our reentry program. But having that team approach to kind of hit all sides of what a young person and their family needs is really where you get the engagement and buy-in and really get some work done. And so that's the other piece that I think we're missing in that process.
Yes, Imar.
Yeah, so much on the mental health. I was just had a client today whose son was killed last week, and was encouraging making available therapeutic services, and the stigma that still exists in these communities, in the Black community, in the Latino community, in lots of marginalized and impoverished communities, is it's still there. People do not feel safe with therapists, and I think that is in large part a consequence of all of the stuff we're talking about today. Of course, is generational trauma handed down. But I really agree with what Beth said about, what needs to happen is that kids that are in schools and in these communities need to have pipeline and resource to becoming therapists, so that they can go back and serve in their own community. I sit on a Department of Mental Health Association advisory board, and I'm constantly running up against a brick wall when I have to tell white therapists, you cannot go and serve Eastside Oklahoma City. Not going to say you're going to do that much harm, but you're going to do some harm, because there's going to be a kid who's in utter crisis, and he's going to explain to you that someone dissed his dead homie, and you're not even going to register that culturally or understand nothing about the gang situation, nothing about how that impacted him. And he's going to have to teach you all about his culture and his experience just to get validation from you that what he's thinking and feeling is rational, reasonable, logical. And then we can get to the point where you're validating his experience, and we can talk about how to maybe not, and we just see it's endemic. Black therapists are invaluable in the community, and the ones that I know are stuck up, tied up with Medicare, Sooner Care fiasco. I don't know if anybody's heard about that this year, but it's just been a nightmare for small therapists, and probably big ones too. But it's just the roadblocks to getting services provided in those communities are just monumental. And again, that's a resource scarcity, resource deprivation under disinvestment issue.
So I would just ditto what both of them said. I have nothing to add. We have a couple programs at My Brother's Keeper. We have MBK sports program that goes into a few school sites in Tulsa, Central, McLean, and Monroe. We facilitated conversations with students, specifically young boys, around mental health and how they feel about their emotions. And what we're realizing is that for specifically young Black and brown males, they don't feel this need, right, for a mental health therapy. They feel like they don't really need it, that they have to see that they have some problem in order for that problem to be addressed through some service that's being offered. And so what we've been curating conversations around in some of our discussions even this month is that it's okay not to be okay, but what is not okay is to stay that way, right? And then it's also okay to not have an immediate need for mental health therapy, or as you would say, immediate need for a mental health therapy, or be in a mental health crisis, and still seek someone to have a conversation with. And so, as Jess and Beth both mentioned, this trust has to be built. These conversations have to be curated in non-traditional spaces. And so, how are we talking about mental health at home? How are we talking about the benefits of seeking therapy at home and in the schools and in your workplace and at churches and all of these different spaces? Because, I'll tell you, even as a young boy, I don't remember, and I grew up in a house of a pastor, so I don't remember us having a lot of conversations around therapy, right? I think that, of course, in the church, pray it away, right? And so just pray about it, But what happens when, you need a little bit more than prayer, right? What happens when therapy is an immediate need? I think something that Beth said that I just would elevate even more is, even as an adult, seeking therapy can be challenging. Like, looking for a therapist lately, I'm like, what are the steps? I am 31, and I'm still struggling with finding a good therapist and figuring out who accepts my insurance and what is the out-of-pocket expense. And I can imagine being 16, 17 and having a parent who's trying to navigate that entire system without having a case manager to support them in accessing those resources. But I also think that we have to resource our youth workers and our schools. I'm looking at Lauren, and I'm thinking about the Opportunity Project, which operates a program called Youth Mental Health First Aid that really upskills youth workers to ensure that they're able to intervene when a student is in a mental health crisis. That's vitally important, right? And so supporting programs that are doing the work that the Opportunity Project is doing is really important as well. So that's only two things I'll add to what they said.
Awesome, thank you. If you know me, I'm very passionate about this topic as well. So I just want to also add that how we see mental health as a fix-it when a lot of people don't want to be fixed. So if we're recommending and really pushing mental health as like, hey, go get fixed, I think a lot of youth, as Bert was saying, it's like, why do I need to go get fixed? I'm not the problem. My environment is. And so I think it's a both and, where it can be very helpful and beneficial. And people, I believe our youth have to know that we're not trying to fix them.
Yeah.
So moving on from community to systems, we asked the youth in what, in their opinion, is the goal of the criminal legal system. And this is what they had to say. It says the system does everything in their power to keep us locked up. They just want us out of the way. They're not trying to help us deal with the big problems. They're just like, oh, you did this? You're going to jail for the rest of your life. Someone said it impacted me. It made me a better person. It made me want to be a leader. It made me want to, help people that have been in their same situation as me, because like I've had someone step up and share their story and I could relate, and I've been holding on to it ever since. So that's why I'm so open to share my story and be willing to talk about it, because that's how you get over it. So a credible messenger in the making. And then a youth talking about a friend who returned home after being involved with the system says, I feel like the system really messed him up. I know he made all the decisions. I ain't going to say the system messed him up, because he didn't mess himself up. But they could have helped him or whatever. It could have been better or whatever. He permanently messed up in the head now. So with the youth having varying experiences and views, and varying views amongst adults on the purpose of the youth justice system, can you share what you believe the goal of the youth justice system is? Additionally, what changes would you like to see in the youth justice system moving forward? Jess, can I start with you?
Yeah, I'm going to have a pretty jaded response to that, because I'm going to be honest tonight. And just a little bit about me. I worked at the University of Oklahoma in diversity and equity, and saw so much discrimination and illegal misconduct there that I went to law school. And while I was in law school, I was co-directing the Julius Jones Coalition and learning about the law in real time and death penalty law. And I went to law school to be a civil rights litigator, and then quickly learned through working with civil rights litigators and in law school that the system is not designed to bring about justice, but to perpetuate the status quo of white America, period. It is not designed to bring about justice. It is an extremely elegant, sophisticated web of causations, reasonings, thoughts, and logics that is rooted in Western civilization. And it is not about, it is to perpetuate a status quo of those who are of a certain class, culture, and really gender. And so what is the purpose of I mean, we all understand that when people or kids do things and they become a public safety threat, we need to have systems and things, and I get that. And I'm not coming really from an abolitionist perspective, so to speak, even though I mean I am, but I'm saying that what I've endeavored to do, because we're not getting very far with that in America, is to, I mean, I'll go to court for a kid and say, hey, this kid's with our program. You don't have to worry about him, judge. You know, he's also a human being, and that has a big impact. And then they don't get put in referrals, and you know, but from the systems we need government funding for criminal justice kids to go to programs, community-based programs that are preventing. I mean, we just do. We need these systems to wither away, to become obsolete. I'm not saying we shouldn't tweak them to improve them, that we shouldn't advocate, but we need that they gobble up our tax dollars. And we're talking about problems that in some ways at their core stem from historic disinvestment by tax dollars. We have chosen to incarcerate and criminalize as opposed to heal, help, restore, and have justice.
Bert?
Beth, why don't you go after that? So what I thought about this question, I'm thinking about, a book that I'd read. I don't know if anybody's read this book by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow. And in that book, Michelle highlights how this incarceration specifically of, people of color, specifically males of color, has been this new way to enslave persons of color, because we have criminalized not behavior, but we've criminalized people. Right? We've criminalized being a certain color, because if we were criminalizing behavior, we would see parity in outcomes. We would see, arrests across races and across genders at the same rate. But because we're seeing this disparity, we are literally criminalizing people. So that came to my mind as I'm thinking about, what is this current role of this criminal legal system. In its state, I believe that it is a punishment system. It's not a system to rehabilitate people back to, an acceptance of society, or back to a place where they have the supports that they need to be able to thrive in society. But to your second part of the question around what reforms or integrations and changes would we like to see, a good friend of mine in New York City leads a program called Good Call. Jelani England is his name. And so he's visiting Tulsa here in the next month. But this program is a resource to help people who have any type of engagement with the legal system to call a hotline and be immediately connected to a public offender. And so that they know the information, they know how to navigate the system. That public offender or this attorney helps them to navigate the legal system all the way through the process. And so I think about what does this increased access to information, this increased access to representation would do to some of the outcomes that we heard and read inside of the report. When we're seeing that 60% of those youth who have some engagement with the legal system are pleading guilty, right, without representation, right? How are we supporting those youth in accessing that representation so that that disparity does not persist? And so that's one of the changes that I'd love to see happen. One of the integrations that I'd love to see happen, as well as the community-based violence intervention work that we'll be leading here in the next few months.
I was listening to a podcast yesterday with Father Greg Broyle, who started Homeboy Industries in LA. It's a program, gang intervention program. And he said, we are punishing wounds. And that quote just like hit me. I was like, dang, that's it. And we're not punishing wounds with individuals. We're doing generations of punishing wounds that's perpetuating over and over and over again. And so while I think those in the legal system may not see themselves as that, I think it's definitely how the system is playing out. And so I would love to see a system like both of you all described of being more upstream. I think also the recommendation of like finding areas where the subjectivity of calls with individuals on, is this young person, being charged, or am I dropping them off at their parents' house instead? Which happens every day, and is a huge point where we see racial disparities pop up. Taking some of that individual call out, I think would make a huge difference. We do at Youth Services we do a lot of prevention work. We have diversion programs, and we have seen over the last several years backsliding and accessing those services. Our misdemeanor alternative program, MAP, works with young people who have low-level charges and diverts them out of the courts and provides services instead. We rely on municipal courts usually to get the bulk of those referrals. Some of them come from the Juvenile Bureau here in Tulsa, but a lot from municipal courts. We have seen a sharp decline in referrals from those municipalities because they've decided they have this other great idea of like, let's just have them sit in adult court all day and see how that goes. Or let's scare them straight. And we know by evidence those don't work. But individual municipal judges that are sometimes like part-time are able to unilaterally make those calls and absolutely change the future of that young person. So I think that's where we can make change, is formalizing some of those things so that the individual decision is taken out.
Could I add one more thing? Beth and I were talking beforehand about a counterpart. Of course, I'm in Oklahoma City, and a counterpart program to Youth Services Tulsa is Pivot in Oklahoma City. And Pivot's a program, great program, and the cops have the opportunity to take the kid there instead of custody, which really they can't because our juvenile detention center is maxed out, right? So, but if they were. And so one of the problems that we have an open conversation with Pivot about is we're reluctant to resource more into Pivot because what happens is it will incentivize law enforcement to take kids into custody and take them to this place. And then so one of the things that I say about just like kind of like letting the criminal legal system, dry up is that even in diversion, very much so in diversion, understand right now, we got to be clear about when we talk about what diversion. Court ordered diversion, I don't like it. Number one, makes community-based providers become snitches. Number two, it incentivizes arrest and charging, and then they get into diversion. We got to talk real close about pre-arrest diversion is one thing, but then again, you're relying on the criminal legal system. So, there's reasons that it needs to be very well thought out about why the criminal legal system is just so toxic to human beings. So, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Love that you bring that up, and because it really makes me think about why I think all systems exist is for control, and not necessarily like it's for the youth. It's for us to feel safer, right? Because if we can't control youth behavior, if we can't control communities, then what do we naturally do as human beings? We punish and push away. And so I heard so many things of like from the status quo. So people who walk out of the status quo, wounds, we punish wounds. We're punishing people and identities. And it has so much more to do with us than it does to the actual people being impacted by the system. And with that, that still impacts how they see themselves and how families see themselves and how communities see themselves. So we asked youth if they felt like their support system prepared them for the current stage of their life that they were in, whether that was young adult stage or high school. And then some of them said, I don't think I was prepared for the stage of my young adulthood. I think it was just me preparing myself. Like I didn't know any of these things would come to me. Someone else says, I don't think I really was prepared. I just had to figure out on my own. I'm still trying to figure out. So as we're kind of moving into like, how are we supporting them at that early stages? The question is, how are we, and define we as you like, preparing youth and their support systems, not just them as individuals, to prevent involvement in the youth justice system? What barriers exist that making preparing youth and their support systems difficult? And we can keep about 1 to 2 minutes.
So great question. A couple things that I think are really important to lift up in terms of supporting youth to prevent justice involvement. A couple things that we've studied through research, whether it be mentorship programs, have a great impact on specifically the young boys of color. We have worked with several mentorship programs across Tulsa to ensure that they are reaching specific areas of students who are at risk or at high risk for engagement and involvement. That's not a systems intervention, but it is an intervention that I believe has been successful in some areas and specifically even inside Tulsa. But I also think that as a advisory board member, but out of school time programming is a amazing way, right, to support students in being prepared socially and emotionally, also academically. And so the more that we're pushing students to be engaged and to be active outside of school time, right? And this is not to say that the blame is on the student not having anything to fill their time, but it is to say that the more that we get the opportunity to expose students to expand their mindsets, these beautiful minds, right, pouring into them. I love to go on some of the trips that we have where we get the opportunity to take students out of the state and to see different spaces, because it really expands their mindsets. And so expanding students' mindsets through exposure opportunities, but through leaders in the community, I think are incredible ways to do that. Barriers that exist that make preparing youth and the support systems difficult. Of course, when we talk about out of school time, we also have to talk about the barriers to transportation, to accessing those out of school times, whether it be for mentorship programs or programming specifically outside of mentorship, whether it be agency led programs or what have you. And so transportation is a big one. Students who may have the time to participate may not be able to access it because of the lack thereof of transportation.
Two thoughts on this one. One was in doing some work with the Family Center for Juvenile Justice around some of the painful things that have been happening there. One of the things that was astounding was the young people and their families didn't know that they had rights as individuals in this system. And so we started working with our team to make sure that they knew what those rights were and educating our families and our young people that they have rights in the system. And I think that translates in all kinds of levels. Making sure that we're empowering parents with information on how do I parent a teenager because it looks different. How do I do that well? How do I talk to my kid about sex so that I can, help them make good decisions with their life? Helping families understand some of those things, I think empowers them to then create those conversations with young people, create safety in their homes, and is going to result in keeping them out of some of these dysfunctional systems. The other thought I had on this, and I think we hear this a lot, how we see change in this is the challenge, but we have to give families the resources that they need to survive. If you don't have a living wage, if you don't have stable housing, it's going to be really hard to be healthy and present for your kid that's struggling with something because you're just trying to survive. And I think if we don't really invest in some of those issues, we are always going to be behind the curve on how we really support and lift up families.
And the question was how to prepare youth for criminal.
What barriers exist?
Yeah, and I just want to lift up. Of course, I know what's meant by the question, but I don't want to prepare anybody for the criminal system. I want to prevent them from getting entangled in it. Of course, now because I have a law degree, my job in our organization is to go to court for a lot of our clients. Two things. I'm just a different approach, but for me, I'm a political and power guy, and so, and relationships. So, I do politics. I recruited the district attorney of Oklahoma County to run, so we have a good relationship with there, and we're going to go in and try to get stuff knocked down, because the system, and I get to bash the criminal legal system a little bit more here. Rights are for sale. This is why I don't practice law. I couldn't charge somebody at the worst point in their life, civil or criminal, for their rights. That just doesn't sit right with my soul. But rights are for sale. And so this program that I'm trying to stand up right now as we speak in Oklahoma City to buttress up against what we're doing, that I discovered that I think is just phenomenal, is and now I can't think of its name, out of San Jose, community participatory defense. So the data shows that a black man alone with no family, one lawyer that he has on a docket of 200 is just statistically screwed in court. Just screwed. It doesn't matter how much he's paying or whatever. He's screwed by the judge, the jury, the prosecutor, and his own lawyer on how much respect he's given, on the level of humanity he's afforded. So this participatory defense takes rooms of people like in this room and trains them about the rudiments of the law. And then people come to us and say, you know, I think I'm getting screwed by my lawyer. I think the DA isn't giving me a fair deal. I think this judge is racist. I think this, that, and the other. And we show up in court, half a dozen or a dozen of us. And that's what we do. We interface with the lawyer. We provide witness testimony and say, you know, Bert's a good guy. He made a mistake on the stand. And then we look at that judge and say, when you face re-election, we're a community here. When we talk to the DA, when you face re-election, we're a community here. So, and that has phenomenal that's what I do on just like an individual level with our staff. We mob into the courthouse and we're ready, loaded for bear. You know what I'm saying? You're going to take one of my clients that I'm telling you is safe, is ready to turn his life around. You want to put him in prison? Well, it's going to be an issue, you know, and that's how I do it. And then, you know, supporting people emotionally because they're in the worst difficult part of their life.
Thank you so much. And we're going to end it with one last question. One of the things in the report's recommendations is lifting up the voices of youth with lived experience. In a state that historically feels that youth are to be seen and not heard, I would love for us to kind of be a challenge of how are we listening to the youth in our space, in our life. Can you share with the audience why you believe it is all of our work to not only listen to all youth voices, whether they have a criminal record or no, but to protect youth voices, believe youth voices, and learn from youth voices? I'll start with you, Bert.
This is the cornerstone of everything we believe and do at My Brother's Keeper. That is, we believe that those who are more proximate to the problem should be more proximate to the power. And the power being policy change, the power being designing strategies and interventions that would prevent this perpetuation of violence and increased safety in communities. And so every chance we get, we host youth on panels such as this, but we also curate conversations, whether it be through mentorship programs or our leadership council, to ensure that boys and young men of color are not just present and tokenized. You know, the last thing we want to do is tokenize a young person and bring them into the space, but don't allow them the opportunity to draft the solutions and the strategies that are going to most impact them. And so my challenge, and as I know that many of you are already doing, is to listen to their voices. A lot of times, matter of fact, Xavier challenged me on something a while ago when I first got to MBK, working on a project. I'll never forget it. We were at Rudolph Library and we were talking about suspensions and expulsions in pre-K through third grade. And we were talking about, you know, well, students that young might not have anything to offer to the conversation, so we may not need to have third graders in this conversation. And Xavier said, well, I don't know about that. If you've ever been around a third grader, they know how to talk and they know how to tell you exactly what they mean. And that was one of the first challenges that I had in MBK. I've had 1,000 since, but I really thank you for that pushback. And because of that, we have, launched these different initiatives to ensure we're listening to youth voice. And because of that, we are just been announced the recipients of a $2 million grant from the Department of Justice for this work. So that's what I'd offer.
So Cynthia and I actually were talking a little bit about this before we started tonight, and I think you're battling kind of practice and systems that don't listen to young people's voices. And youth services has been trying to do this work forever, meaning like I was a youth employee at Youth Services of Tulsa as a high school student, and having conversations about and helping assist in trainings on adultism and how you fight that decades ago. And still trying to do that work and fight that battle. And it takes a lot of dedication and work. And people that have been doing this forever, myself included, constantly have to check yourself and go, wait, why didn't I make the effort to get a young person in the room to make sure that they had a voice? Why didn't I make sure that they were armed with all the information that they needed to feel like they could speak from a place of, knowledge? So I think we have to challenge ourselves. Xavier, you were really good at this, like calling ourselves out when we're like, hey, that's not authentic. Like that we're missing the important pieces here in how we elevate youth voices. But also that piece of making sure that we aren't just bringing a youth in the room, giving them one question, thank you for your answer, bye. That we are partnering with them, making sure, hey, before you walk into this coalition meeting, let me give you some backstory. Let me give you these other pieces. Your perspective is critical here. I want you to also know, here's some pieces of, the legal system that you might want to know. Here are some dynamics in the room and where the power sits and, whose voice is going to be loudest. They need to know all of those pieces so that they can feel empowered to speak authentically too. And I have seen that time and time again missed. And we're like, yeah, we want to hear from you. And then we quickly dismiss their voice because they don't understand. Well, we didn't help them understand. And that takes a lot of work. It's really hard. Nobody gives you funding for that. But it's critical to, really creating change and designing interventions that actually work.
Yeah, that's great stuff from both of you, and I learned a lot there. I'm always it's funny, I'm on a youth panel because of my work at Live Free and our involvement with youth. But you'll hear me say, if you knew me, I'm not a youth person. I respect so much people like Beth and Bert, my wife, who's a teacher in ninth grade at Star Spencer High School on the east side, and my best friend, who's the principal at Star Spencer, because that's a profession, man. And like I just told you, I'm a political and power person. So what I always have, I frequently, my wife or my friend will say, you should have had a kid on that panel, or you should have had a kid involved in this. Well, I didn't do it because I always felt like, to me, it comes like, well, I'm trying to accomplish something and this kid has no idea of the game, right? And so I just have always been like, I'm not the right person to pull a kid into something. I don't want to be responsible, So I say that to say I stay in close partnership with people that do know how to like on his. I'm sure Bert has 24 kids, but they'd be great for this, to show up to City Hall or to speak on their experiences, because my wife and my friend do, and so that's how I compensate. Because I just know my lane, and like people, there are some people that are kid people. I want to deal. I'm sorry, I'm the guy who deals with the bad guys. You know what I mean? I deal with the problems. I don't, and some people are great at empowering kids. Just to see how this happened to me, my friend, he was a principal at John Marshall in another historically black high school in Oklahoma City when the Julius Jones Coalition was heating up. And he got me on the phone with a sophomore there who said, we want to march for Julius. We want to do something and we want to march. And I said, okay, I'll ask the family. And I'm thinking, these kids are going to get in trouble and but I asked Rodney, my friend, you okay with this? You don't want to put them in danger because, cops and anyways, they did it. And these kids dang near probably saved Julius's life because they walked out of school, and then every other high school in Oklahoma City and Stroud and probably up here were walking out. So kids are going to save us, they are, and we need to do that. That's critical.
Can we give it up for our panelists one more time?